welcome back to Preserving Our Past, Informing Our Future. I'm Sydney Stevenson, and this series is produced through the School of Occupational Therapy at Texas Women's University as a part of my capstone project. As we continue our exploration of occupational therapy's history, we begin to see that the profession was never shaped by a single idea or influence. It instead emerged from several movements: moral treatment, the arts and crafts movement, and a growing emphasis on humanism, all of which highlight the importance of dignity, creativity, and meaningful activity in people's lives. But alongside those ideas, occupational therapy was also navigating its place within a rapidly evolving medical system. This tension raises important questions that still resonate today. What makes something therapeutic? Is it the activity itself, or is it the way it connects a person to meaning and purpose? All right, Dr. Reed, let's get started. So, for my first question, how did broader movements, moral treatment, the arts and crafts movement, and the push for humanism influence early practice?
I think we've talked a little bit about that along the way now, of essentially enabling our society to see that there was a place for people who, what to use a broad term, were different. That, they were born with a condition such as cerebral palsy. They had rheumatic fever, which limited their cardiac system, or they, for whatever reason, acquired what we broadly call a mental illness. That didn't make them useless or worthless, or said somehow or other return to some sort of animal characteristic. Conditions only represented a surface issue. They could still be contributing members of society. And of course, along the way, a lot of technology and medical advances have changed the kinds of people that we work with. For example, as you know, the number one diagnosis that we work with now is stroke. Back then, a person who had a stroke was probably going to die. Or again, a family might keep them at home until they died. But what we know as rehabilitation of stroke simply did not exist. That was pretty much a fatal condition. Of course, we treated a lot of TB then. We hardly, well, I shouldn't say we don't have anybody with TB, we do, but that's a secondary diagnosis instead of its the primary diagnosis. So the people that would have different conditions, but the fundamental ideas which the founders got from moral treatment, that mental illness did not require you to be sent to the countryside, um, and the arts and crafts very much pushed that you concentrated on what the person was able to do. Now, in the arts and crafts tradition, it was what you could do in the arts and crafts world. We've expanded that to simply what can you do?
Hmm.
Uh, um, the humanism that all people should be viewed as human. You were not less human because you happen to have an identifiable condition, now called a diagnosis. So those three, and really, there were some other movements coming along uh, th- that also contributed to the Emmanuel movement. Again, that because you had some sort of condition that society recognized, it did not mean you no longer had a soul. So, early on, people with conditions were often not allowed to go to church or synagogue, or they were not viewed as meeting the criteria of being able to be worthy of that religion. When it said it was really quite common for people with disabilities or mental illness to be denied being able to go to church. And that's another part of the movement that came out of that same period of time, that you shouldn't be denied, although there are certainly examples. And I know of an example into the 1960s of people not being allowed to go to church because they were disabled. The rest of the people who attended that church, again, did not want to see this disabled person, okay? And so, essentially, the person is being denied their humanism because of a condition, and maybe some of that we're still struggling with in society. I think those movements were an attempt to decrease the isolationism, I guess is a nice general term for being denied access and opportunity. And I think hopefully we do convey to students that regardless of where you come from or what kind of condition, you don't get treated less as a lesser in terms of OT. There's good examples in World War I of uh, that establishment, the reconstruction aides, making the decision. If you entered the OT clinic, you entered on an equal footing with everybody else, and it didn't matter what your rank in the military was. In the OT clinic, everybody was a person who was there for the purposes of dealing with a improving their occupational performance, and your rank was irrelevant. I hope we translate that same idea that it doesn't matter what your rank or condition or background or religion, or that in the OT clinic you are there to hopefully benefit from what we can offer as occupational therapists to improve your occupational performance, and that's what matters.
It is, and
So
in my experience, I would say that's definitely a huge part of our education.
yeah, that's part of our ethical principles, which I think stem from the understanding of those movements that were part of the society when OT was developed.
I would agree with that. All right, so Dr. Reed, the literature highlights a tension between OT's humanistic roots and its alignment with the medical model, especially during World War One. How do you see that tension? Was it something that was inevitable?
I don't think the tension is limited to World War One. It's fundamental. It's inherent. Um, yeah, we're coming from very different philosophies and purposes. The medical model, medicine, was based on the idea that if you could get rid of the unwell of the person, that their health would either be maintained or returned. So most of medicine is aimed at getting rid of something, of getting rid of a pathogen, of getting rid of dead tissue, of getting rid of a portion of the body that is not considered needed anymore or is considered the cause of the problem. So medicine is largely a subtraction process. OT is an addition process. We are trying to increase, to improve. I mean, all the adjectives you learn to put in front of the goals for what you want to achieve with your client are almost always positive.
Mhm.
And if you write one in a negative tone, your instructor is likely to tell you to change it around. So we work very much on an additive scale. We're trying to add to the people's quality of life, add to their ability to perform, add to their ability to participate in society. And I think is you simply you have to understand both of those issues. They because they're not inherently in conflict. They're simply different views of what is needed in the situation, and both are needed. There are reasons why certain organs need to be removed, and there are reasons why you need to try to get rid of pathogens. So uh, I think I don't see it so much as a conflict as a case of understanding that situation from a different viewpoint. that when the doctor helps the person get rid of the pathogen, that then allows the person to again participate. So almost in some ways you can see it as a continuum that you reach this point, okay, and then the situation changes. And so, yeah, it's hard. It's a very often hard for a physician to understand why we want to spend so much time helping people do things because for them, their understanding of dealing with health, because for them, they want to get rid of, and we're sitting there saying, but we're going to add to. But you realize in math, the way you check your addition and subtraction is to do the opposite. Maybe we're not doing as good a job in teaching OT, but and maybe we're missing the boat by not spending a little time explaining, what medicine is and what it is designed to do, and that that it's a different viewpoint, that it has its strengths and weaknesses. When OT, we're lousy at getting rid of pathogens for people, since that's not in our wheelhouse.
No.
And understanding then that from physician standpoint, that need to fill in behind the subtraction is what we do. That's our contribution to enabling people to continue to live their lives. Whereas for physicians, once they've gotten rid of that pathogen or remove that organ or whatever, they see their mission as having been accomplished.
Mhm.
Okay. Because it has. That's what they do, and you don't want a mechanic doing surgery on your brain, and many doctors couldn't figure out how to deal with the carburetor in their car. It's more a case of understanding, what is it that we do well, and how does that contribute to people being able to live their lives, and there's a lot of things that contribute to living. So if there's a tension, I think it's manufactured, and I think it's manufactured from lack of understanding. And yeah, physicians can being annoying. They probably think we're annoying, particularly when we pester them for filling out a form. So understanding goes a long ways, and understanding that, yeah, well, yes, we believe strongly in our beliefs of helping people add to the quality of their life. Physicians also feel strongly that sometimes you need to subtract.
Yes, I can definitely see that. So, moving on to a little bit more about our treatments, you have argued that no single treatment is inherently therapeutic. It's the approach that combines the person and occupation. Can you expand a little bit on that idea?
One of the prior presidents of our association, Henrietta McNary, really began to articulate what was therapeutic and what was not therapeutic. And it's therapeutic if it enables the person to do something better or is overall part of an additive process. It's not therapeutic simply because you put it in front of the person to do, or if it doesn't meet any need of that person. And the idea that people need to have their time occupied is not sufficient.
Mhm.
Then maybe they don't need to have you help them to deal with their time. So that why we began to separate recreational activities away from OT, because initially they were very much combined, is that recreation, it can be very positive, but it can also be a filler, and it can also be very much within the person's choice of activities to do or not to do. Whereas therapeutic occupation has a specific objective or objectives in mind that are designed to improve the person's overall performance. So we need to keep that. in mind. Our approaches, though, because we have sort of 3 pillars of occupation, person, and environment, that means that there are several combinations. You can work on one of those at a time. You can work on any 2 of those at a time, and for some clients, you need to be working on all 3, and even more to the point, if you're working with a client over a period of his or her return to performance, you may change the approach. In fact, you need to change the approach. So if you're dealing with somebody, to take the stroke, for example, initially that person's ability to perform is going to be very limited. The person may be back to what we were talking about. Can the person even sit up in bed with support? Can the person sit up by themselves? Can the person transfer from the bed to the chair? Can the person safely walk from the bed to the bathroom? Can the person drink essentially a liquid meal? Or can they go to pureed food? Can they go to soft food? Um, can does it need to be pretty much spoon fed? Can they use a knife and fork? Um, to Can they make their own sandwich? Can they cook a can of soup on the stove? So you see, you've moved from essentially bed to room being the bedroom, to the bathroom, to being able to move to a dining area, to being able to move to the kitchen, okay? So just in that process, you've changed your use of occupation from very limited occupation and very limited environment, okay? And the person's ability to function is very limited. Okay, to expanding the environment, expanding the nature of the occupation, and expanding the person's ability to perform. And now, if you want the person to be able to go back to work, then you're going to have to expand beyond the hospital home environment. I allowed the person to get home somewhere in the meantime there, but not back to work. Okay. So now the environment is going to have to expand beyond the home, or even if they're going to work from home, it's going to have to change from simply existing at home and eating and living at home to some sort of productive activity, even if it's simply keyboarding on a computer.
Mm.
So that's why I said all of those approaches that have been developed over the years have a place. And we're back to the therapist's mental flexibility to observe and then create the right objectives and then the setup to do those objectives um, for the person based on where they are in their continuum of performance. And so to say one treatment is better than another is, in my mind, simply not seeing the whole picture. At any given point of time with any particular client in their environment, one approach is better because that meets the objectives of the situation. But in the broad perspective of looking at your textbook, one is not better than another. And in any given practice, certain techniques will address the issues within that practice better than others. But again, the situation and the client's needs, and in some cases, the availability of occupations determine what are the best choices. Not what are the best techniques, but what are the best choices for that situation or that client, not the inherent techniques as it is described or as ideally carried out.
Mhm.
And that was, the point I was trying to make is that uh, one of our esteemed professors said that We tend to be down on what we're not up on, and I've found that a very useful phrase. That if you're saying, "Well, I don't like that technique," my guess is you don't understand it. You don't understand either what it is, or what it is designed to do, or in what situations it's appropriate, or perhaps the most desirable. In that mental flexibility, we're also supposed to be able to tolerate I mean, a lot of differences. There are professions where you can be pretty limited in terms of what you see. If your job is to do a certain laboratory test, you can limit your thinking to doing that laboratory test. Okay, that's not OT.
No, we're very broad.
And I think it's very easy for us to to be able to use that mental flexibility in certain situations when we're working with clients, and then we turn around and we say, "But we don't like this other piece of information that we're being presented with."
Mm,
That's a failure on our part. And again, it may be very useful in certain aspects of our society, that where that's built in. You're supposed to believe this, but not believe that. But that's not inherent characteristic or desirable trait in the practice of OT. If you're not practicing OT, if you want to limit your thinking to X and exclude Y and Z, have at it. But if you're practicing as an OT, X, Y, and Z are all equally available.
I like your point about how you were saying we have to look at the whole person and then we can determine, okay, what's the best treatment for this person in this particular situation.
Yeah. Well, and it's not just looking at the whole person. It is looking at the situation, the environment, and the availability of occupation. I mean, making buggy whips is a very good occupation. It's just not very practical in our society today. Now, in some areas where now, if you're involved, for instance, in recreating Western scenes, okay, in which horses are going to be hooked up to wagons or other vehicles, you may need a horsewhip.
Mhm.
Okay, so even there, as you can see, on one hand, you can say, in typical society today, who needs a buggy whip or horsewhip? Okay, mostly not, but we're still making Western type theme movies. But we still have Western themed parks, and we still have Western themed museums, all of which may make a new or refurbished buggy whip a very useful piece of equipment. Uh, so it's very easy to limit our thinking, but that's not the way OT was designed. And I think if part of the reason you have to go to OT school, it to it is to learn to expand. Yeah, technically you do know how to do that, uh, but to do it consciously, uh, in a way that is designed to help others improve their performance. It requires a certain amount of due diligence and study. We don't learn things in OT school that don't exist out there, but we do learn to better perform certain aspects. Most OTs admit that they learned how to observe better. You can see, you can listen, and when I say observe, although we tend to think of vision, I just automatically include hearing and feeling, and that we use the word observe to assess the environment critically.
Yes.
So a large part of OT education, as I said, can really be summarized into learn to observe more critically so as to increase the amount of factual information you gather, and then learn to use that information to enable people to improve their performance. Yeah, they used to our early brochures used to talk about creativity, and I think that what we now understand about brain function really turns out to be that mental flexibility. That people that we talk about being creative tend to have mental flexibility. So when you think of an artist that has who made a significant difference in the art world, what was it that they were doing? They were using their mental flexibility to look at things in a particular way that created some sort of a lasting artwork that we admire or at least admit added to our artistic collection.
That's a really interesting take. I haven't heard that before, but I really like that.
Yeah, and many of our early OTs were originally art majors.
Yes.
Yeah. Physical education makes a great background for PT. Major in art and even art history can be a very useful background from an OT standpoint.
I could see that. Dr. Reed, is there anything else that you would like to add for today?
I think that's really the essence of what makes something therapeutic. Is that understanding of making the situation, the occupation, and the person better able to work together. I mean, we talk about participation in society. One must be able to participate with oneself as well.
Mhm.
As I said, I found out the hard way. Participation, perhaps we need to expand our understanding of participation, that it invades the person, the occupation, and the environment. And that if it improves our participation, it is therapeutic. If it simply establishes it, that it exists, that's nice, but that's not necessarily therapeutic.
Well, thank you, Dr. Reed. This has been incredibly informative, and I really like some of the perspectives that you brought today. I think this was my first time hearing some of those, and it was fascinating. But what really stands out to me from this whole conversation is that the tension between humanism and the medical model isn't something that occupational therapy has just moved past. It's something that the profession has to continue to navigate. From our earliest days, occupational therapy has been shaped by these competing influences that are each pushing to define what it values and how it shows up in practice. What becomes clear to me is that this tension is a part of what has allowed the profession to grow and to adapt and remain responsive to the needs of the people it serves. So, as we continue this series, we'll begin to discuss in our next few episodes education, leadership, and legacy within occupational therapy. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time.